I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Welcome to Opus 249. Thanks so much for tuning in and for your continued support. Some of y'all are relatively new to the show. Thanks so much for checking it out. And others of you have been here since day one, way back in 2019. Really appreciate your keeping this project relevant and a key part of the movement to expand and even decolonize what we call classical music. As I mentioned in the last opus, I will be offering some words regarding the fires out west, definitely chanting for everyone out there, and happy to see the ways in which the community is really coming together to help those in need. But I'll speak more to that after today's interview. I'm very proud to welcome Kristin Lee into the TRILLOQUY Network. She's a violinist who released an album a couple months back called American Sketches. It's a really great collection of works that highlight the diversity of the American aesthetic through the so-called classical lens. I know that as many of us are thinking about America right now, its present and maybe its future, I think it's really important to go back and see how artists are really defining America through their work. And Kristin Lee's American Sketches is a really great example of what that can look like. There are works on the album by some of the familiar names in so-called American classical, folks like George Gershwin, Scott Joplin, Amy Beach, if you know who she is. But there are also incredible features of music by Thelonious Monk, John Novacek, Kevin Puts, and others who you might not be as familiar with, or at least might not be familiar with within the realm of music for violin and piano. Kristin also has a fascinating story about her becoming an American. As y'all know, I'm not afraid to talk about the struggles of Afro-Americans on this show, but it's really important for me to hear the perspectives of immigrants and other people of color, just as a reminder of the broad work that we have to do. So shout out to Kristin for bringing a bit of vulnerability and just personal reflection to the conversation as well. To get us into our chat, we're going to listen to a little bit of music from the album American Sketches. Kristin Lee is featured here on violin alongside pianist Jeremy Ayani Jordan in their interpretation of a Thelonious Monk tune called Monk's Mood. Hope you enjoyed this bit of music and hope you enjoy my chat with violinist Kristin Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think music and the arts is really, regardless of whether it's America or elsewhere, it's really about the celebration of, culture and history. And so I think the American music is very much in that same realm where you can reflect on the idea of what America really stands for. And I think it's reflected in the music. So to me, because I am personally an American that moved to this country from South Korea, I really believe in the idea of America being a melting pot. I really love the idea of America being the celebration of multiple culture and multiple diverse people coming together to inspire one another. And I think American music is very much in that same realm. It's a celebration of different sounds and different backgrounds coming and cultivating one another, inspiring one another to celebrate what it's maybe originated from, but also taking those ideas and creating something new as well. So it's about really the evolution of the different backgrounds and cultures and cultivating that into something new. I think that's what American music really is about.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of those different iterations of American music as you've realized them on your latest album. But there are types of certainly violin playing or fiddle playing, as many might say, that they would immediately identify as American, more so than they may identify American music out of who we consider American composers. So, of course, I'm thinking about things like bluegrass, folk music. Just curious, do you have any relationship with those types of violin techniques in addition to the Western classical techniques?
I mean, I would say that my training is very much in the classical realm, which basically means I'm very good at reading music. I'm very good at executing what's on the page. But my curiosity has always been just off the charts. I've always been super curious about delving into different types of music. And so I did toy around with a little bit of improvisation, and you certainly witnessed that in the album too. But I would say in the realm of like folk and bluegrass, anytime I see those players, I'm always in such awe because I think I've attempted some bluegrass playing by playing pieces with music written by people, the great names like Edgar Meyer or Mark O'Connor. So I've sort of like tried to play these pieces that they have written in the style of bluegrass that they have written out. And, bluegrass is so fascinating because it does require a lot of versatility and technicality and virtuosity in your playing. And at the same time, you have to play with such ease and understanding like the real integrity of the rhythm. So I have certainly attempted, and I am planning to try more. But it's not something that I feel like I would say I'm super fluent in yet.
Sure, sure. I wonder how you think about closing the gap between audiences who, are used to the jazz and blues and other types of American instrumental music, and closing that gap between those communities and folks who are more familiar with the Copelands, the Bernsteins, and the American music as we may define it. Is it narrative? Is it musical exposure? I wonder if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that actually. I think it's something that, now that I live as a professional violinist and I do this for a living and with a lot of conviction, I think it's actually quite the responsibility of the performers and the artists to close that gap.
Hmm.
I think the culture historically has somehow led itself to making these divisions around genres and divisions around the type of music that are celebrated. I mean, I guess unfortunately that's not just in music, but it's in everything. Um, and what's interesting is that even if you look at these composers that the classical music loving folks love to celebrate, a lot of their inspirations actually stem from the folk music, the music from, not from the courts necessarily, but from the streets, or it's and people. Really, it's really about the inspirations from different types of people. But somehow, over time, um, I really believe that it has sort of divided itself into different types of music, and that sort of became the norm to present music with that kind of division and separation. Um, and so, as I think our times right now are very interesting because I think that idea of that divisiveness is a little bit more recognized, and I think people are given the courage to talk about it more, and we are able to sort of reflect on that and seeing what differences we can make in changing that culture and changing that history. So, so I think it's really something that I feel very responsible for in making that change as I continue to do what I do.
Wow, wow. Well, I would love to talk a little bit about your background and origin story. I wonder if you can talk about when you moved to the United States and what are some of your earliest memories of America or this idea of American culture?
Yeah. So I moved to the United States when I was about 8 years old. I was I was finishing off second grade. I guess it was middle of second grade in South Korea, and then I was moving to the US. And of all places, I moved to a small town called Auburn in the state of Alabama.
Okay.
And yeah, so, and we were there because my father was a visiting professor to the university, the great university there, Auburn University. Um, but at the time, Auburn really did not have any Asian people. So our family, we were basically kind of like the only Asian family in town. I mean, there were a few others, but certainly in my elementary school, I was the only Asian kid. It wasn't even that I was the only South Korean kid, but I was literally the only Asian. And I have memories, very distinct, vivid memories from that period where the kids in my class were like legitimately surprised and shocked to see somebody like me. Because I
Mm,
think a lot of these kids have never seen anyone that looked like me. So um, it was a very interesting time because even if it was intentional or not, I think I did deal with quite a bit of bullying and racism.
mm,
One specific memory was my teacher when I first moved. She obviously recognized that I didn't speak the language, and instead of embracing me into the class and helping me learn the language, whenever it was English time, she removed me from the class and I wasn't allowed to participate because I didn't speak the language. So, it was just a lot of these kinds of very strange experiences I was dealt with as soon as I moved to this country. Um, and it was really, really tough. I was a very outgoing, extroverted child in Korea, and I had so many friends, and I was super social as a kid. And then I moved here, and then I just felt like I couldn't belong anywhere. So that was really hard. But then what really lifted me up, and it's a true story, was that outside of the school, I think it was because it was such a small town. I think the whole town knew that, oh, like this family from Asia moved here. And then, oh, it turns out that they play some music. And then this elderly couple, they found out that we were a musical family and took interest. And I was playing the violin already from Korea. So she found out that I play the violin and I was pretty talented. And so she basically took our family around around the town, and she was a journalist in town, so she wrote for like the local newspapers and introduced us to like the women's clubs, the library, all these like local orchestras, and basically got us to be the musical family in town.
mm.
So yeah, so there was this beautiful transformation. I mean, I was still struggling at school socially, but throughout the town, because of this beautiful couple who really recognized us, not by who we like, what we looked like, but because of what we were special with, this musical gift that we carried. They were able to bring us on as like this musical family that moved into town.
Wow.
So yeah, and I think that was a very, very pivotal experience for me. And when I reflect back on like the first sort of chapter of my time in America, I think that really is very, very significant, and probably what led me to, have me stay in this country and continue to play the violin.
And for clarification, so it sounds like you moved to the United States as a violinist.
I mean, as a young violinist, I mean,
Sure.
I mean, my parents actually, to be perfectly honest, I was playing the violin and the piano in Korea, and I was actually more serious about playing the piano. But our family didn't know that we were going to stay for such a long time. So my mom said, "Oh, piano's, such a hassle to move and it's hard to find. So why don't you just play the violin for now and you can keep it up?" And it was just like that. It wasn't anything super, super serious.
Have you managed to return to the piano? Maybe one day we'll have an album where you're the pianist and the violinist.
Oh. Let's just say I much prefer playing the violin at this point.
That makes sense. So in your earliest musical training, was the approach or was the repertoire Western, or were there Korean composers or pedagogies that existed in your earlier training?
No, in my earlier training, I mean, when I was just starting off in South Korea, it was all we were implementing the Suzuki method. So I was using the Suzuki books. Yeah. Um, so it was definitely the Western. I was playing the Vivaldi concertos and all of that stuff. So
Did you like that music? Did it just seem like an activity you were being made to do? I wonder what your personal relationship with that repertoire was.
well, as a child, so I come back. So to go back a little bit, I come from a musical family. My mother was actually a founding member of the Seoul City Opera. And when I say Seoul City Opera, it's not traditional Korean opera, but like Western opera.
I see.
So yeah, so when I grew up, I was spending the weekends as a child going to see my mother perform, like La Traviata, and she was Carmen. And Carmen was my absolute favorite opera as a little kid. I mean, I don't know what I knew, but I guess maybe the fiery red dress that Carmen was wearing was really, attracting me or whatever it was. I loved it and I just watched it on repeat as a child. So I think I've always had a draw to the Western music. I was definitely very encaptured when I was listening to all of this music that my mother was singing. And then so when I was given the violin and the piano and started working, I think I was instantly drawn to it for sure.
So fast forward a few years, I wonder what you would consider a catalyst or, the turning point beyond the canon and, really centering living composers and exploring music that's, not by Beethoven or Vivaldi or Mozart.
Yeah, I love that. So yeah, fast forward, our family decided to stay in the States and violin became something a lot more significant. And I was entered into the Juilliard school from a very young age. And so violin became very, very important, maybe the most important thing in my life. I was practicing, 6 to 8 hours a day, and there was a lot of training that was involved as a child. And looking back, I think those times were very important, but it was also something that was something that just I had to do. It was something that I wasn't necessarily given a choice.
Mhm.
So at a certain point, yeah, it started to become this thing that I do, but then I never had the chance to think why. And as I grew up and then, went to college and was around people and making new friends, surrounded by really talented, amazing people at the Juilliard School, I started to question, okay, like, why do I do this? Do I want to do this? And so I started to ask all these questions for the very first time in my life. And then I realized that I had a lot more curiosity about music as a whole, more than just my instrument.
Mm.
In a way, I was able to realize that because I sort of hit a wall a little bit because I didn't really know. I had sort of, I've learned and performed all of the standard repertoire. I've been given the training since, young age. So I felt pretty comfortable with the instrument. But, my personality, I've always needed some sort of challenge. And so I was like, okay, what's more? What is there that I need to explore? And then through just, being very lucky and being surrounded by great people, I was, exposed to great composers, a lot of great conversations, mentors who are sort of opening my eyes to different types of music like jazz, and also in the world of like hip hop and folk. And I started to really question again, wow, a lot of these people who are creators, a lot of people who aren't necessarily in my sort of world where it's about the conservatory training and just mastering an instrument like very athletically, they are constantly pursuing something more. They're
Hmm.
constantly asking more questions. They're curious about the composers of, the field that I am more familiar with myself. How come I'm not asking them any questions? Why is it that my training was always just celebrating what I do, but never opening my eyes to the things that are outside of my comfort zone?
Hmm.
And that was like a mind-blowing moment when it was just through people, encountering these people, because in a weird way I felt a little bit like ashamed of myself, being like, wow, these amazing names from the world of jazz are asking me about Bartok and Berg and Bach, and they know so much, and I have nothing to ask them about because I've never been even curious, or like I haven't gotten to know anything about their world. And so I think that started to really open my eyes um, and provoke my curiosity, but also just it was really all sort of it was stemming from those kinds of conversations and relationships. And then once I delved into understanding and learning a little bit more about their world, it was incredibly shocking in how it was informing the way I perform my Western music too.
Interesting.
So I realized that um, it was helping the things that I feel comfortable with, because it was it was shedding sort of the light in a way where I was noticing things that I didn't notice before in these types of music that I'm comfortable with, right? By knowing something else. So that really it like sort of like answered a lot of questions for myself in understanding my pursuit. If I am keeping my eyes open, if I keep my ears open, if I keep my mind open to all sounds, all types of music, it actually informs what I know best to a higher level as well.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, it's the whole idea about the inspiration of other things coming together and creating something new, and it was very much applicable to what I was experiencing.
It's interesting how the smallest experiences can bloom into the biggest things. As you're talking, what I found myself thinking about is as a junior in undergraduate, preparing for my junior recital. And for the first time realizing, oh, I guess I should know something about these composers, maybe when they were born or what their lives were like. It's really interesting how just those seeds results in so many different things. And for you, I'll say that it has, among the things that it's resulted for you, is this album, American Sketches. Just generally speaking, was creating a solo album ever a part of your plan or something you thought about? I mean, so many of us are trained to really practice to get a job in an orchestra, even though there's so much more. So again, was a solo album in your periphery before you created this?
I think I've always thought about wanting to release an album of some sort. Yeah. I certainly did not think that this was going to be it. and this program in particular, to be perfectly honest, was not necessarily in my plans to release as an album, but it was one of those things when the universe sort of aligned and sort of said you should release this album because so the whole backstory is that my very prominent collaborator on this album is Jeremy Jordan. And Jeremy and I went to school together, but we weren't really that close or anything. But we reunited about a decade after we graduated because I saw him in performance with clarinetist Mark Dover, and Jeremy was performing written music, but also improvised music. And my mind was just blown away. And with all of these things I just talked to you about the realization and all these things, it was around the same time when I saw Jeremy's performance. So um, when we chatted afterwards, I said, Jeremy, we should totally collaborate because I want to learn from you and I want to make music with you because your world is something that I want to get to really delve into more. And
Hmm.
so we started playing together. We started collaborating. We started to perform in recitals, and we gave a concert at this small venue called One Rivington in East Village, New York.
Hmm.
Um, I think in attendance, maybe there was like 40 people. It was a very small, intimate concert. And this man, whom I have never met, he was just attending. He came to us afterwards and he said, I really, really love that. And I would love to hear this in my living room. So can you please record it and I'll help you make it happen? So it was one of those moments where we were like, okay,
Wow.
is he serious? So yeah, that was sort of the first step to getting the courage to record this and to try to bring it out as an album. Yeah.
Yeah, and shout out to Mark Dover of Imani Wins. Always inspiring and being a catalyst for so much. I do understand, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is your first solo album, but not your first album in general. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, I've been featured on other albums, and yeah, but this is the very first one where I curated it. I wrote the liner notes and chose every detail to the entire thing.
So, how did you choose what would make the cut? I mean, there's so much American music out there. How did you specifically come up with this program?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I mean, to be honest, this album was a long way in the works because if you notice, a lot of it was recorded actually pre-pandemic,
Hmm.
and we went ahead and recorded a lot of the music that we were performing in our recital. So Jeremy and I said, okay, let's just do these things since we know them, and it sort of started there. And then when I started to sort of put it together, I started to think, okay, so this is a lot of like mishmash. There's a lot of different stuff here. What are we trying to say? Like what is the theme? What is the narrative? And then I started really thinking about this idea of America a little bit more. What is important to me as an artist? What do I feel like needs to be known to the world? What's the message? Like I wanted to sort of think about all of these different elements. And then I realized that I really need a name like Amy Beach. I need a name like Harry Burley because the idea of the more classical sounds, traditional classical sounds, being integrated to something that is more in the jazz realm or the ragtime realm is very important to me. And people of the past, but have made a significant contribution to the American classics was really important. So the Burley and Amy Beach were sort of the later additions to the album. And then there are pieces like the three pieces that Jeremy arranged, which is by George Gershwin, J.J. Johnson, and Scott Joplin. Those were coming out of just like the celebration of our collaboration. The more we wanted to understand each other's voice, Jeremy at one rehearsal was like, "Hey, we should read these. I wrote this for you, and let's just try it out and see how it goes." And so that was sort of a little bit more in that realm. So it's really like a mix of there are different stories to how each piece was integrated to here, but the idea is that as a whole, it's about the idea of what American music really is, which is the celebration of like the evolution of the different types of music, people of today, people of the past, people of the classical sounds, people of the jazz, people of the ragtimes, people of the more contemporary. So it's a real celebration about what all of these things are coming together as one.
And as we think about this celebration of differences, I wonder how those differences showed up for you as you were recording these pieces. Were there times when, you played the Amy Beach and you need to completely shake it off before you engage Joplin, maybe grab a different bow, a different violin? Did those differences show up in that way?
Very much, very much. I think so. And I think this was something that I knew was going to be the case walking into these recording sessions, because I have been featured on other albums and working with other artists. And the nice thing is I've been featured on, things like, Bach concerto, but then I've also been featured on Vivian Fang's violin concerto, which is a newly written piece, very contemporary. And then I've also been featured with a group called Five Elements, which is a very avant-garde jazz sort of sounds. And when you're in these recording studios, the playing aspect is really fun, but what you really learn that's super intriguing is the process of how each artist really works. So for instance, when I was in sessions for a little bit more traditional classical music, like the Bach concerto, every single bar, every single note is nitpicked, and you want to really perfect it to exactly the way you are supposed to execute it, right? Whereas when I was in the studio recording a tune with some of these jazz folks, it was all about, okay, let's do 6 takes. Okay, which solo feels like it's the most right, has the right spirit. So it's really not about the perfecting of every single note, but it's more about like the vibe. Like, how do we make sure that that everyone improvised and worked through that performance that was most special, and then they take that entire track and then put it in as their track on the album. With obviously some levels and things like that. So I took the very same approach actually with this album, with something like the Amy Beach and Harry Burnley. A lot of it was, we did it by sections and wanted to make sure that it was exactly the way I wanted to hear it. Whereas like the Thelonious Monk and the Entertainer, they're actually just one full takes.
Nice, nice.
So we didn't actually we did a bunch of just different runs of them, because they're short also. So we just felt like, let's just do it a bunch of times and choose the one that we like, and sort of went with those. Yeah.
What you're bringing up for me is, I'm thinking about this phrase as we're talking about American music, land of the free. It's like with so much of the Western European repertoire, it fits into, such specific parameters. While, as you're mentioning, with some of this more contemporary non-Western European music, you're free to sort of really emote, really put something into it. I wonder if that results in different levels of pressure, and how that comes out in the music. When you're playing Amy Beach, it seems like, to get every note exactly right, there are some nerves that might come out in the music that just aren't there when you're improvising or playing the Entertainer.
I love that question, because one would think that when you're playing something that is improvised, it's actually more liberating. But because my training has been a certain way of just perfecting for so many years, it took way more courage to do things where I have to free up my mind and improvise. And I love that you asked this question, because once I gave myself enough courage to feel more comfortable with that language of improvising, it actually really informed the way I would play the beach too, and it actually made things a lot easier. And it's such an important thing that you bring up, because now I also teach, and I have a lot of students that I work with, and I think this is something that needs to be implemented into the conservatory training, because so many of these students, and including myself when I was in that moment before I delved myself into all of these things, so much of our training is like based on fear.
Right.
It's all about like, I don't want to mess up, or I don't want to make the wrong note, or I don't want to, what if I have a memory slip? Like everything is so based on this idea of fear, rather than communicating the music. And it's this hurdle that you have to really go over, because if you don't, even if you know it perfectly, and if you practice so many hours, your mind and the fear in itself can be hindering to the actual performance, right? I mean, it just literally does no good to
Mhm.
anyone. Um, and I think I'm hoping that it's slowly changing, but the idea of music is about communicating. It's really about your voice. Yes, it's about the celebration of the composer's voice, but it's about their voice that you're translating to your own. I think those kinds of teaching and the message needs to be out there so much more for the next generation of these, highly talented students, because it's it was a really eye-opening thing for me when I had to learn through that process.
You talk about communicating the music. You've done that so brilliantly through this album, but I understand that now you're communicating much of this music for live audiences as, promotion and continued work of this album. I wonder what it feels like performing these works that you spent so much time with in front of a microphone, probably, multiple takes. Does it make the live performing easier? Does it put more pressure on you to perform it live? I wonder what your thoughts are.
Um, yeah, actually for me, it's been a really joyous experience to be able to bring these live. And I'll be bringing it to the live audience even more next season. But the beautiful thing that I've been integrating with performing these works have been sort of implementing my story about why these pieces. I mean, basically like what we're talking about right now, and being able to share the reasons, because I think a lot of people, when they first see this program, they understand that it's American, but they say, why, like, why these works? I think that's been a really reoccurring, repeating question for a lot of the audience members. So the narrative that I've been able to share about my story, and maybe shedding light to the idea of what it's like to be an American immigrant too. I think, so embodying all of these different topics and being able to share that story and communicating that through the music has been very joyous, because I don't think I've really allowed myself to really do that until now, to really share my story or be able to communicate in that way through the music. So it's
And
been really great.
speaking of sharing your story, will you return to Auburn for a performance, or have you returned to Auburn?
I have been going there a few times, and I'm actually going to be back there in February. I won't be bringing this particular program. Hopefully, I can in the near future. But I'm going to be going there with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center to do, actually, funny enough, a whole program that I actually curated myself. But it's all about the Spanish music, so it's a very different program.
Okay, nice, nice. Well, what's next for you? Any concertos, recitals, additional recording projects coming up?
Yeah, I've been really thinking about the next project that I want to delve into for a recording, but my head is really into some of the commissioning projects that I'm doing with a lot of collaborations. I have a number of programs that I'm working with different groups and with different composers. So I can't quite share a lot of the names yet, but we're doing a lot of projects there. Actually, one of them is with a percussion quartet called Sandbox Percussion.
Oh
We're
yeah.
commissioning, yeah, and we're commissioning the Canadian Asian Canadian composer Vivian Fung for a piece for violin and percussion quartet that we're going to be touring next year, and it's going to be premiered. So that's a really fun project that's in the works right now. And yeah, I mean, this year my big focus has been working with my students at University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. So I've been doing a lot of work with my students. And then I'm also the artistic director at a chamber music series in Seattle called Emerald City Music. And so that's been a big project that I've been focusing on as well, in addition to the live performances and this album. So keeping myself
Wonderful.
busy.
Well, as we await your future projects, how can folks listen to American Sketches, buy American Sketches, and even learn more about you?
Yeah, American Sketches is available on all streaming platforms. So you are able to find it on your favorite streaming platform, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music. You can also purchase them as physical copies of the CDs in a lot of different places too, actually. Or if you come to my live performances, it's more likely that I'll also have some CDs with me. I'm also on a lot of the social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook. So you could find me there. My handle is Violinist Kristin. And then you could also visit me on my website, violinistkristinlee.com.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to wrap things up by going back to this conversation of differences. Differences are among the things that I do believe define America, but it also proves to be a challenge across society. I would say, especially these days as we enter this new political age. I wonder how you think about the role of music in engaging the challenge of difference more broadly. Can music really bring us together?
That's a great question. Music plays such an essential role right now in society because it may not be that it could fix the physical problems of the world and of the people, but my thinking is that music plays a role where it allows the minds of the people to be more open. It allows the minds of the people to find um, a moment of reflecting. I think it allows reflecting in a way where they can be reflecting on, their own life and their own days, but also in a way where they can allow their minds to be elsewhere, where they don't have to be so consumed by all the negativity in the world. I think it allows them to find a breather in a lot of ways. And I think by doing so and by experiencing music and by music being an essential part of the society in that way, I think it brings the people's minds to just be able to hear others out. I think there are issues that are just incredibly dense and divisive right now, and matters that need to change, matters that need to that we need to fight for. There are a lot of things that are important. So it's not that music is just basically diluting those ideas necessarily, but it's really important to always allow the mind to see the broader picture. And with so much of the tension, I think it's hard to do that if you're just sort of dwelling into the news. So I think the music plays a very important role in allowing the mind to create that space. And I think that's why music is so important.
An excerpt there from Southland Sketches. It's a piece of music by the legendary Afro-American composer Harry Burleigh, or Henry Thacker Burleigh, as you'll sometimes hear him called. I agree with Kristen when she says that it's important to look at the bigger picture. Listening to Burley helps me remember how hard of a time our ancestors had. And I do mean our ancestors broadly, not, no matter what your background or how you identify, the folks that came before you had it tougher, at least in many ways, that you have it now. And it's that level of gratitude for my current life and situation that pushes me forward, despite the day-to-day challenges of trying to decolonize classical music and to live in the so-called United States of America in a really interesting time. It's important not to begrudge our lives and to really move forward with gratitude. And I really appreciate thinking about that, thanks to the music on this album, American Sketches. Thanks again to Kristin for being on the show. I'll have links to her album and more on her in the description of this opus. Be sure to check out the album and everything that she's up to. So, moving west now for the Trilloquy, I'd like to continue offering my words of encouragement to everyone impacted by the fires in California. It isn't hitting as home for me as the floods did a few months back down in the Southeast, but there are indeed composers that I know that have been impacted out there. So I hope you'll do what you can, whether it be physical, financial, spiritual, or anything in between, to support the efforts of everyone impacted by the fires. I wanted to offer my Buddhist perspective on this based on a couple passages from texts that have been coming to mind for me as I continue to think about what's going on out there. The first that I'm going to share with you comes from the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra, just for a little background, was described by the Buddha, or the historical Buddha, as we tend to call him, as his greatest teaching. So Nichiren Buddhists like myself hold the Lotus Sutra in very high regard, in such high regard that of its 28 chapters, we actually chant excerpts from 2 of those chapters every morning and every evening. The excerpt that I'm going to share, maybe I'll demonstrate what it sounds like when it's chanted. So this is sort of a mix of classical Chinese, classical Japanese, and Sanskrit. This short excerpt goes, Jinzu Dikino yo asogi go jozari yo du zengu yo jo du zo ju yo kingo jindai ga jo di ga ji do anon ten in jo du manon rin jo no kakuzu du ho jo ga no ju da ge ga ju do jo yo da jo ten kakurengu do za jo ge kako umandara ge zambudu da jo ga jo do gini jo ken jo din uvo jo go no no ze do man. The English translation of that is, such are my mystic powers. For innumerable kotis of eons, I've always been on Eagle Peak and have lived in various other lands when people witness the end of an eon and all is consumed in a great fire. This my land remains safe and unharmed, constantly filled with gods and humans. The halls and palaces and its gardens and groves are adorned with all kinds of gems. Precious trees bear plentiful flowers and fruit, and the people there are happy and at ease. The gods strike heavenly drums, making a ceaseless symphony of sound. A rain of white mandara blossoms scatters over the Buddha and the people. My pure land is indestructible, yet people see it as consumed in fire, filled with sorrow, fear, and woe, a place of countless troubles. So as I've been chanting this over the past few weeks, thinking about the fires out west, what's coming to mind is a focus on what really matters. It takes some time, at least it takes some time for me to really interpret what that means. Again, this idea of a land consumed in fire, but some people within that land being safe. But even people who see the land consumed in fire, it's really one filled with a lot of blessing and benefit. I don't think this verse is to say that people shouldn't feel a way about the destruction of their homes. It's obviously a catastrophic event, and it's very important, even from the Buddhist perspective, to live in reality, to really operate within your context. But again, it's this idea of what really matters that comes to mind for me. So, in this passage, I see the historical Buddha is trying to remind us that even when the land is destroyed in a great fire, the gems of our spirit and our determination are fully intact, or can be fully intact. It takes a lot of courage to turn poison into medicine, as we say. And I hope that everyone impacted can find it within themselves to rebuild, yes, physically, but also spiritually. We can't let our spirits die, no matter what external stimulus or circumstance exists. There's always opportunity. And this so-called pure land, this untouched land that can't be destroyed by fire, according to the Lotus Sutra, I think is representative of our shared community and faith that keeps us going no matter what. And again, as I read stories about folks who are, really building community and helping those in need, it really, just inspires me and gives me hope for humanity and for what we can do for each other. I think that's really what that passage is speaking to. That's item number one. The second thing I wanted to share comes from the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. And again, just for a little background, Nichiren Daishonin was a 13th century Japanese monk who actually established the practice of chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo toward achieving an enlightened life state. So during his life, there were all types of calamities that Japan had to deal with, from earthquakes to flooding to Mongolian invasion, and even horrible fires like we're dealing with over out west today. So he wrote a letter to his followers in the 1260s called On Dealing with Disaster. And I think it ends really profoundly. To close out this letter, Nichiren wrote, "Should one not set aside all other affairs and consider, first of all, why these disasters occur? If one does not do so, then more and more such disasters are bound to occur. Such is my humble opinion. I leave it to others to accept or reject it." That's how he ended that letter. Now, I can sit here and play armchair quarterback and blame all of this on climate change, which I'm sure is at the very least a part of what's going on. But I'm not a scientist. That's just something that I can throw out there. But Buddhism, at least that I practice, is a religion of reason and thought. So as people on the ground are rebuilding, I hope the government and the scientists and whoever is involved, the geographers, can figure out something to prevent things like this in the future. I mean, there are coastal towns and river towns that have built levees. There's stuff put in place in northern cities to deal with snowstorms. There has to be something that could be done to prevent these fires. I know that when I was living in Southern California, there were some really strict laws about throwing cigarette butts out the window of your car, or when you're camping and building fires. So not to say that there is absolutely nothing in place. This is a generations long thing. But as we're all seeing, I think it's easy to affirm the need for something more to happen, because this feels unprecedented, at least as far as the damage to homes and people's lives is concerned. Anyway, just my way of bringing a bit of my faith and whatever encouragement that you can get from it into the dialogue in a way that I hope is helpful or inspiring to some of you out there. Let's continue to do for each other what we can where we are. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to y'all again very, very soon. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Peace.